The devastation in Wayanad is extensive. Rescue operations are rife with obstacles, physical and logistical. And amidst the condolences pouring in, one topographical expert has put out a thread of maps using screenshots from Google Earth to help understand the Wayanad landslide. The thread on X is interesting because it uses geography, physics, and topography to put together what could have happened and how it could have happened in what is the Chaliyar river system. Chaliyar is the fourth longest river in Kerala, and its origin happens in the surrounding geographical region where the landslide happened. This thread was created with the information that he had at that time. He might not have been able to include some of the more affected regions in the surrounding area, and thus is not by any chance an exhaustive explanation. Now let's look at the thread of maps. The first one reads, this part of Wayanad is within Chaliyar river system. It is a west flowing river which drains into the Lakkadive Sea on Kerala coast, though at this point it is north and east flowing. Then he goes on to show a section of the stream that rises at 2,000 meters above mean sea level and has a steep fall of around 1,200 meters to reach Vellarmala and Churalmala section. Another one shows the visualization of the gradient of the flow. The water flow gains high velocity because of the angle, as you can see, and the gradient, to put it simply, is steep. The tweet reads, the river gains high velocity and has tendency to erode the upstream severely. It eventually settles some of the sediment in the lower section and transports some more to rest of the Chaliyar system. He also points out that the region faced landslides in 2020 as well, because the trees and rocks were stripped away in the previous instance. The potential for further erosion is higher. He then shows how, when an extreme rainfall incident happens, like in Wayanad this time around, a river flowing in a steep terrain which already has an exposed bed erodes further and brings down a lot of debris to the gentler slopes and valleys, which in this case happen to be Mundakai and Churalmala village. I talked to Raj Bhagat, the topographical expert who had put up this thread, to help understand one possible causes of this devastating landslide better. Thank you for speaking to SoSouth, Raj. So I saw the thread of maps that you had put up on X, describing one of the possible reasons and the way it could have happened, the Wayanad landslide, which wiped away 2 villages over there. So let's begin with the comparison of the landslide from 2019 and now. Pudumala and Mundakai. Pudumala, where the landslide happened in 2019, and Mundakai, where this time around, the 2024 landslide happened, are separated by a hill. Could you help understand the science of this? Because I think both of them are in the same river basin, the same Chaliyar river system.
Actually, it is not just applicable to Chaliyar river basin, but it's actually applicable to a lot of parts of southwestern Western Ghats, where there is high amount of rainfall. There is a steep slope, as well as there are years of fluctuating rainfall as well, right? Like, so in some years there might be extreme amount of rainfall, and some years there might be below average rainfall. So speaking at a geography level and a climatology level, many of these places exist in the southwestern Ghats, which forms the parts of western parts of Kerala, southwestern parts of Karnataka, parts of as well. So all these have a similar profile, and in these places, it's actually a lot of these incidents are happening. Actually, in the previous years, we have seen a lot of landslides happening in Coorg and also parts of Wayanad. So these are actually very similar, and very similar in how they happen, and what are the factors that are causing it, as well as what are the factors that are aggravating the damages in places like these areas. So I mean, in these kind of places, so what we have is, first is that the steep slopes allow it to have those sections. So that's number one. And second is the extreme amount of rainfall. So there are different estimates, but since we do not have rain gauges everywhere, we do not know some of these extreme numbers as well. But anything between 50 centimeters to 80 centimeters or 90 centimeters could have happened as well in a 24 hours basis. So which is actually a very extreme amount of rainfall. So these happen. in case of the current landslide in Wayanad, so how we put it is, the mountain itself rises, it's actually 2,000 meters above sea level. And then the villages are actually located some 850 meters above sea level, right? Like, so there is a 1,200-meter difference, 1.2 kilometers, if you want to put it. So 1.2 kilometers of gradient is there. And so what we have is actually a very steep gradient. So there is a high amount of, slope. And, all this happening within a few kilometers, right? Like, so that means the terrain itself is favoring some kind of a slide. Now, what holds this is actually, some form of vegetation or rocks, etc., that usually typically hold it. So when it, I mean, in these conditions, previously, I mean, this is the landslide itself. I mean, of course, the landslide is the culmination of a certain set of events. But before that itself, the previous rains would have dampened the soil, and it would have made it a little bit, loose. So that's the setting of it. And on top of it, these extreme rainfall events happen. And these rainfall events, hence, when this rainfall happens, the soil becomes much more loose and it fails. So this is a failure. And that failure would eventually lead the falling of soil and rocks from top, and they all get pushed down along the stream towards the downstream area. So in these downstream areas, these villages are located, and that is what has happened.
You talk about the erosion and the other effects. You told me about the gradient slope, how there is the crown and there is the toe of it. So the water that started with basically with the kinetic energy, the flow and the current and the force of it just increased, and when it settled down, or when the pressure with which it hit the ground, hit the a lower portion at the 850 thing, it was much high. Now, can you explain how this aggravation of loosening of landslide or of the soil, which caused this landslide, must have happened because of what happened this year, or how it has been happening in the past, or because of the previous landslides, or is it a culmination of all of these?
So these are historically, these are landslide susceptibility areas itself. So landslides have happened because of natural reasons, as well as because of man-made reasons. It has been happening in many of these places. So in 2020, I mean, the most recent one, I'll say that is 2020. There was a similar amount of, I mean, not similar amount, but there was a good amount of, debris flow in this particular stream that we are seeing. And at that time, there was a lot of vegetation in that area, right? Like, so there were lots of trees and everything, but that landslide, it was the precursor to this one, right? Like, so that had created, that had removed a lot of vegetation, but it didn't cause huge amount of human loss, because, the energy was contained a little bit. But it had removed the soil, and it had removed the vegetation, and it had laid the groundwork for this event. So in this event, what has happened is that, as it happened, there was no vegetation to protect it. And there were no man-made solutions. There are certain engineering solutions. For example, in some places, they built a series of check dams to control this debris flow. So those kind of man-made interventions were also not there. And there was no, even man-made vegetation planting or anything of that sort along the new areas was not there. And there was not enough time, right? Like, so it also depends on when the previous event happened, and the time for the place to come back, and then the next extreme event happens, right? Like, that kind of a play comes into picture. But unfortunately, before the previous before the effects of the previous one had been taken care of naturally, the next event had happened, which meant that a lot of open soil was available, and a lot of instability was there. And what it required was an extreme rainfall event, and that was the rainfall event that had happened. And so when it had happened, a lot of soil was pushed further down, which meant there were lots of hanging slopes and stuff like that might have existed, and everything would have failed. And I mean, this can be even, I mean, this may not even be a single incident. This could have been a multiple incident itself. So there could have been one or two events itself. It might not be single event, and that we cannot assure right now. It requires a little bit of more studies, but which means that first landslide would have, first slide would have happened where first amount of, some amount of soil would have come down, and it would have created more amount of instability to the region, and another one would have moved down later, and that would have added a little bit more, and which means there is more compounding effects. So these kind of compounding effects might have been there. We are not sure about it. We have to check how it has happened. But I mean, there are some ground reports saying that, there were two sections, etc. But these are, purely hearsay, right? Like, so we haven't recorded anything as things. So what we are getting is like people reporting it from ground. So there could be, but this can be studied further with, more ground data and more satellite images that come into picture. We'll know how it panned out.
So Raj, you are also a civil engineer, and if you had a chance to go back to when the village was growing, to when the initial incidents happened, what could you have done differently so as to avert this particular tragedy?
So I'll put it at 3 or 4 different things I might have done. First is that these mountainous areas are actually very, very sensitive, ecologically very, very sensitive. And so in these kind of sensitive areas, we need a very clear plan, a draft, a very clear spatial plan on where to build and where not to build and what to build, etc. and how to build as well, right? Like, so in the sense, not every place can have constructions is the first thing, right? Like, so that means that, so in this case, for example, a lot of damage could have been avoided if the buildings were not there very close to the stream, right? Like a lot of these resorts have come up. Of course, there is a economic aspiration to people as well, which cannot be denied. But in the sense, like, at what cost is the next question. So, which means that there is a problem of where to build, etc., and what to build. And in some cases, it might be a very critical infrastructure that might be required, and we do not have land or something like that. That means, what to build, right? Like, so what can be allowed to build, and what certain balancing things, etc., and how to build. So when in such areas, if we know that there's such risks exist, the same kind of construction techniques that we follow everywhere should not be applicable, right? Like, so that is one. So this could have reduced a lot of damage. This is not existing in, it's not existing in any city for that matter, let alone these sensitive areas. So that is one section of it. Second is, we are actually very poor with respect to our studies with respect to these regions, right? Like, so we do not have, though we have a very coarse landslide susceptibility map that tells you which are the areas that are prone to landslides. We do not have further details on what has happened in the last year in this particular stream, that particular stream. That kind of granularity we do not have. That kind of studies we do not know. Partly, I feel that this is because we do not equip the local institutions as well. So even in this case, I mean, I'm an outsider going to come and study Wayanad, right? Like, so that should not be the case. If we had built the capacity to have local colleges which maintain databases, which study about these details, and we have a good amount of academia around this, it would have helped a lot, and they could have had more detailed insights into what has happened before and what could likely happen, etc., etc. So that is second part. Third is, when I looked at it, the moment I saw the old satellite images, I knew that the soil had been opened, which means that any form of extreme rainfall event that can happen over here, it would likely to cause more damage, right? Like, so it is ready, ripen kind of a thing. In such a cases, there are two ways to intervene, right? Like, so one is to have natural interventions. Through natural interventions, also two things. One is that let it regenerate by itself. And the second is, artificially led by us, like, planting a little bit and to, reduce the pressure, right? Like, so there is too much of energy coming down, and you want to stop that, and you need a little bit of help, which means that artificial planting of trees where there is so in places where landslides had already happened in the last 4 or 5 years, you need to have some kind of natural measures as well to, prevent this form of erosion. And the next is, which is the extreme case when you are not able to, or if you think that the timeline is so short that another event will happen very soon, then some engineering solutions, right? Like, so for example, in some places they build check dams, series of check dams to prevent debris flow or to control it or reduce it, right? Like, so the impact would be reduced to some extent. Of course, in some cases, the check dams itself would fail to some extent, but the amount of impact can be reduced to some extent if it is properly designed and executed. So at various stages, we have so many things that could be done. But unfortunately, we do not do it because of, there is a lack of capacity. Local institutions are not equipped, whether it is academic institutions or whether it is the local panchayats and the district planning committees or whatever it is. There is a lack of capacity to do it. And because of this lack of capacity and lack of finances that is available to these places, it's, they are not able to do it. They do not have enough data to, they do not have enough measures to monitor these things. They do not have data. It might be there here and there in bits and pieces and stuff like that. But, very vulnerable, extremely vulnerable regions like this should have a very good database as well as records of events, which we do not have right now. And which means that you have to pour money into capacity building as well as, these kinds of resource development and everything around that as well.
So Raj, that comes back to the whole sensitizing people for the sensitivity of the area itself. The last post that you had put was, and I'm quoting you here, and like always, developmental pressures in such ecologically sensitive regions can aggravate the damage. Below are the images from one of the villas aimed at tourists. The village was placed right at the stream in front for giving best to the tourist. And in preliminary analysis, this looks like one of the buildings that have been severely affected. Taking it from there, you talk about the developmental pressure that has been put over there. Now, there have been two separate committees that have submitted their own reports, having made a detailed, if not, the data collecting, as you have mentioned, at least the existing ecological condition, analyze the state of affairs over there, and had made its, recommendations. Here, as an influencer, what can you do to inform the public more, mobilize the public more, so that this kind of recurring disregard, recurring devastation does not occur anymore? How can we bring back or reduce the man-made part of it by now doing human intervention?
So first is that, we need to study a little bit more of these regions. So we need to equip the institutions. That is number one. Parallelly, a lot of times actually we act only when there is a disaster, right? Like, so always there is a planning angle to it. And within that, there is a small section of capacity as well. So as a society, we have always, we have been working on a very reactionary basis. So we do not, unless we see the incident happening in front of us, we do not actually do anything about it, right? Like, so we wait for a disaster and only then we make some step. And it is not the best way to go about things. But that is how we have always been working. I believe that this incident can serve as a good lesson for us to look at certain things. Now the thing is that people should. Of course, there will be after this also there will be a lot of tourism pressure. Once the holiday season starts, again there will be a little bit of demand for these kind of places. But before that, what the government should, this is mostly a government-led initiative that is required, but the pressure has to come from people, right? Like, so the people have to put more pressure on how to make this happen. And this cannot happen overnight. I don't think that it can happen overnight, but, this incident can serve as a lesson for everyone. And, they start pressurizing more on seeing like what is happening, what are you going to do about it? And those actions come into public picture, and then it is scrutinized and it is taken forward. So probably another committee would be set up. I hope it is a very well-equipped one on what should we do. One problem with these committees is that usually they have biases towards either side, right? Like, so there is the environmental side then there is this economic side, right? Like, so the economic aspirations of people, there are actually legit requirements for developing, right? Like, so then what is the job opportunity, right? Like, so those kind of questions exist. So which means that a good committee should have a good balance between either of them. If it is completely restrictive, then governments and people have a tendency to brush it aside. Or if it is completely lax, then we have the negative effects of the environment as well. So from that perspective, actually, what we require is a little bit of a holistic plan for these areas. For what the government should do right now, and what the people should ask uh, based on this incident is that, Kerala or any other government for that matter should identify all the vulnerable places, not just landslide, environmentally vulnerable regions, different environmentally vulnerable regions. And each region should have a very detailed master plan which incorporates the findings from academic institutes about these kind of risks that exist. So that should be incorporated into the developmental plans, master plans, or whatever statutory plan that they are having. It should be incorporated into it. For that to happen, some money has to be allotted to these academics. So right now, there is a tendency not to do any of these things. So what I would say is that as a single person or whatever it is, these transformations cannot be done by a single person or whoever it is. What I tend to create is usually a base of people, right? Like, so hundreds of people getting awareness about these topics. It's not necessary that they might have the solutions, but they create the pressure. Right, like, so the creation of the pressure would lead into the fund diversion and governance diversion into these things. So at the end of the day, what I would like to see is that, a roadmap towards achieving a certain plan, right? Like, so one plan can come into picture, but how do you achieve that plan? For that, you need a roadmap. So if these two things, if the government is setting up a very good committee and getting it done for these vulnerable areas, then it is actually a big win. So usually right now they are in a disaster response mode, but the discussions that happen after 1.5 weeks to next 1 month, that is actually very, very critical. And at that stage, if public is well informed, the media is well informed about these incidents, about different types of laws that affect it, whether it is any other governance mechanism also that affects it. All those should be discussed in the next 1 month, and at that time the pressure will be put into the government. And if we do that, then probably a holistic plan can come up, and for that a roadmap also can come up. So that is my thought.
This is where the entire roadmap should be built, is the way forward, instead of just being reactionary, heads rolling or putting it punitive measures or giving just compensation is not the end of this. Because as we have seen, the Wayanad has kind of become, especially northern Kerala, the Wayanad plateau, the Coorg area, which is parts of the Bangalore, the parts of Deccan plateau, which is also part of the Western Ghats. These are ecologically sensitive. The Madhav Gadgil report of 2011 was very, very restrictive. It was completely environmental specific. 75% of the entire Western Ghats had been notified as ecologically sensitive one. Kasturi Ranjan was towards the other side. It was more economically thing. But at the end of the day, the question remains, neither of the recommendations have yet been implemented. How to go forward? The government already has these committee reports at their disposal, and yet nothing is moving forward, or nothing concrete has moved forward. What is the way forward now?
The pressure, the media pressure and the citizen pressure in the next 1 month is the thing. So if it is lost in the next 1 month, then status quo would be there. So people have a very short memory, I feel. So many times I talk about flood, and by March nobody would be there to support. So, but during monsoon or something like that, there will be a lot of concerns and everything. But then again, and nobody respects science actually after some time. So the best thing is, the pressure that, the kind of pressure and, diverse views that get pulled in during this next 1 month would be the critical one. If it is always about, bulldozers or those kind of actions, then it is not going to work. What is the comprehensive roadmap, etc. To build that, you need views to come from a lot of people, and how receptive are they, etc. will be based on that, and also something that I have realized of in the last 2 years, I think, very clearly, is that we need a good champion. So one champion to take it forward, who is a little bit powerful. And if the champion doesn't exist, then situations can be a little bit difficult. A lot of times it's these initiatives, even if the setting is not accepting it, if the people around it is not accepting it, if the champion is there, then it can get pushed. So in the next 1 month, a lot of role has to be played by media, people like me in social media, and as well as these champions. If things work in the next 1 month, then so that's our deadline. So that is how I see it.
That was a very comprehensive understanding of comprehensive, not exhaustive understanding of what is the way forward. It is done. We are now in disaster response mode, but there is a lot to be done afterwards. And thank you for your inputs, and thank you for talking to SoSouth.